So what I thought I might do is tell a little story about how I have worked with, I suppose, mixing biodiversity with the various communities. So communities within the local authority, communities outside, and also developing, I suppose, relationships with NGOs and with government organizations. So yeah, as Saul said, oops, hold on, let's go from this way. I'm actually working in the council since early 2000s, which is such a long time. It's like 21 years. And when I started, I'm a botanist by trade, and this publication had just come out, the Guide to Habitats in Ireland, which was a real game changer in bringing biodiversity, or that idea of the science of landscapes, into more regular parlance. So for the first time, people were given this guide and they were able to stand in a field and look at what was around them, and then look at the guide and say, oh, well, I am now in this type of habitat. So the communication at that stage was largely between ourselves and the local authority, various NGOs, central government who'd produced this guide with the Heritage Council. And again, my position as a biodiversity officer came from that 1992 Rio Convention of Biodiversity, which led into our National Biodiversity Plan, which then led into our own Fingal Biodiversity Plan, which we produced in 2010. So yeah, as Saul said, I started off on this little 6-month contract traipsing the coastline of North County Dublin. So up here, you've got the boundary with Fingal, and I think there's something like 48 kilometers, which you guys will probably know really well with your dealings with Portrand. So walking all along here, looking for rare plants and coastal habitats. And part of what I was doing at the time was validating the faucet category habitats in that Habitat Guide to Ireland. So at the time, it was kind of the communication, the conversation was, it was all new, and it was largely between a couple of us in the local authority and kind of what are we doing going out looking at plants. And then at a, I suppose, a national level, well, we have to work on this new idea of biodiversity, and you guys have to all say what you're going to do for biodiversity. So what we thought we'd do is we'd look at the already pre-designated habitats like our SACs or NHAs. Do I say that? Yeah, is that okay? Yeah. Yeah, and these are just two of my little favorite plants, the Inula cryptomoides and the Cranberry marittima that we found along the coast. Okay, so soon after that project, which was, I was kind of on my own a lot, and as I say, didn't really meet anyone in the community, and was kind of a little bit of a biodiversity was also new in the council and also new in the local authority. And then popped up this little plant, the hairy violet, or the Viola hirta, which has become such a one of my iconic species in Fingal. At the time, so many of you'll know that along the Fingal coast, there's a huge amount of links golf courses. Some of them are privately owned and some of them are in council ownership. This is Corbelis Golf Course up in Donabate. And at the time, this is a good many years ago, there was records of that rare plant, the hairy violet, old records. And the council wanted to, is that okay, Chiara? Is it gone a bit mad?
Put it full screen, and maybe, does that work for you? For
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, try to swap view.
Swap view to presentation.
That's perfect.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Could you guys see it before now?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
We could, but we could see the next slide as well. It was like the presenter's view we were seeing. And
I'm sorry. Okay.
No,
okay.
You're grand. You're grand.
Sorry.
Okay, let me pop this out of the way then. There we go. Yeah, so at the time then, the communications were largely between departments. So between the various departments in the council, a lot of communication with the golfing community. And we were still at I've written these 4 kind of titles: nature conservation, biodiversity, green infrastructure, and climate resilience. We were still somewhere between the nature conservation and biodiversity conversation. The idea of green infrastructure hadn't even come on board, and the idea of climate resilience sure hadn't even been heard of at all. But what was really funny and iconic for me about this project was the relationship that developed between ourselves in the council and the community around North County Dublin in relation to this plant, this hairy violet. So we were redesigning the golf course. So an American golf course designer came in and wanted to create a suite of 3 new tees, greens and fairways. And these rare plants were along the proposed new fairways. So we all had to go out and we had to tag these rare plants with little flags. And then the designer had to reroute the fairway and the tees and the greens around this. And the new hole forever became known as Debbie's hole, which was embarrassing enough. But the conversation within the council was really funny at the time, because lots of the lads in there would play golf and they'd always be coming up to me and they'd be like, "Are you the one who found that hairy plant out on the golf course? Do you ever, like, can you just tell us where it is, and can we go out with our pucks and our, you know, our little sticks, dig it out? Like, what's the big deal? What's the delay in getting our golf course going?" And there was so much interdepartmental conversation about, well, actually, these are our legally protected species. And it was all new at the time. Biodiversity was still really, really new. These are our legally protected species. In terms of internal planning, this is what we have to do. So there she is again, the hairy violet. I want to move this over. Yeah, but in terms of conservation around biodiversity, the conversations were still very much being had within the converted community. So, you know, we were talking to people who knew what SACs were and NHAs were, who knew what rare plants were, who knew what, you know, legally protected species were, and who were interested in this. The vast majority of regular civvies didn't have a clue what we were talking about. Which brings me on to kind of the next area, which I worked a lot in, which is up in Howth. So I worked a lot on the coastal islands, or offshore islands, the ones up around Skerries, and this is Ireland's Eye here, which is just off Howth. So we went, you know, because of this rare plant survey, I was able to go and visit some of these islands and look for rare plants. This guy here is the boat owner, and he brought us out years and years and years ago, myself and a guy called Declan Duke, and he would say, years after, these were the only 2 people who would ever get off the boat and look straight on the ground, because we'd be looking for rare plants, look straight on the ground and not be looking up, because most people were looking for birds or whatever. Anyway, that guy there is now my husband, and 4 kids later, and I met him on the boat going to Howth looking for rare plants. So Howth, a lot of people would say that it is the jewel in the crown of Fingal. Arguably, I don't know, it's beautiful. It's got loads of amazing habitats, and it's where I've spent most of my working life and done really seeing the growth in, I suppose, my engagement with communities. So trying to bring the whole idea of biodiversity from, first of all, something that existed in science, to then something that slowly made its way into the local authority, to then something that slowly made its way into the community. And it's where, for the first time, I saw the interaction of all of these elements of it. So you can kind of see it's got some gorgeous habitats. It's absolutely stunning. And a whole load of community engagement work. Now, this is where I'm thinking, God, I wish Paul was with me on this one, because I wouldn't have any of the training that he would have in terms of how to draw, you know, things out of the community. But years and years and years of work and engaging with local groups went into this operational plan for that area of Howth. And how it started was way, way, way back in the council. A few lads from Howth rang up the local authority and said, look, a whole load of our walkways are being totally, they're either being overgrown, people can't walk on them, or new people are moving into Howth, they're buying land and they're stopping people from walking these traditional rights of way. So what are we going to do? And I started liaising with these landowners or local community people, and well, I don't know, lads, sure, will we formulate ourselves? So they got together and they formulated. Now this was months and months and months of work as a group called Howth Pathways. And I don't know, will Paul or anyone who work with community groups agree, the power of the council paying for a lunch maybe every month on a Saturday, or, you know, a few cups of tea up in the summer pub, that just brought the whole group along so much. And remember, they were giving of their time freely every Saturday. They were going out. Excuse me, the issues that we ran into, which I was like, gee, I don't know how to sort out any of this at the time. You know, they were coming to me going, well, now what if we fall? What if we're out there on a Saturday and we're cutting a path, you know, and you've said we can do it, but we fall and we hurt ourselves and we can't go to work. Are we insured? Or what if we cut a path and then some guy comes along and trips on an area of path that we've cut, or a stump that we've cut? you know, are they going to come after us? Are they going to find out that it's me, Joe Blogs, from this house in Howth, and who are they going to sue? So all of those sort of things came up, you know, insurance for these volunteers, and also the timeline of stuff. So, and this is something in terms of communication that comes up time and time and time again for a local authority, and I can only speak from where I sit in a local authority. Working with community groups is fantastic. Huge amount of time goes into, you know, organizing all their fabulous energy and ideas, but then it has to fit in to a local authority program as well. So kind of managing that and all the conversations that go around that. Anyway, these are the 4 Fáilte Ireland approved looped paths that, after months and years of work with that community group, have now got their own insurance, and there's funding to redevelop them, and they're fabulous. They all start here in the village, and this one, the red loop, goes all the way around the cliff, past the Bailey Lighthouse, and this could take Anton from about 4 hours. This one is called Bog of the Frogs, and you hop up this way to come back. So they all start and finish at the same place. They're all looped walks. You can go on this way to Sutton if you need to. And then there's a series of smaller walks. So you can do the Upper Cliff Walk, which starts off on the red path, goes all the way around here, and then you come back on the yellow path. But again, just working with these, you know, men and women from Howth who were then learning how to use not machinery, but hand tools. And they were going to get trained on how to use hand tools so that they could then get insurance for being out and using these hand tools. Coming together with what paths we're going to go on this Fáilte Ireland loop. Because if you kind of step back a little, there are literally hundreds of rights of ways that traverse Howth, literally hundreds and hundreds of them. So the process by which, and the community engagement, and the sitting down for hours and hours trawling over old maps, and when my mum was young, she used to milk a goat on that path up there now, and so that is a right of way. Teasing out all that historical information, sitting down the endless cups of tea. And I have to tell you, sitting in some of these houses, where would they be now? Along here. Like, it was all I could do. They've got the most amazing views of Dublin Bay, and here's me, like little whatever girlie from Mahini, wanting to go, oh my God, like these super, super, super posh houses, and just being like, oh yeah, I'll have a cup of tea, yeah, that's grand. But just, you know, all sorts of people living up in Howth and just sitting down and teasing out, well, where are we going to go with this and what are we going to do? And the constant thing, and I say this now, and it probably is the worst thing for community engagement, but it's awful hard sometimes in the local authority, because there is this assumption that the council can do everything. The council can just throw money at it, and that's not the way. So it's, I suppose, bridging that gap between what is possible and what the community can do. So yeah, here, these are the Fáilte Ireland looped walks. These are some of the amazing volunteers that still get together, some 15 years later. They're still out every Saturday, or in the growing season, they'll be out every Saturday, and they might go out once or twice in the winter, and they'll cut and they'll take the stuff away. And this is how they do it. They literally print out a map and they'll send it to all their members, and they'll draw a line on the map. This is the path we're cutting next Saturday. And they'll say, this is where we meet. And again, that was such a learning curve for me when I started working up in Howth, because literally it would be, I'll meet you at the stile by, you know, Kitty's cottage on the West Mountain. And here'd be me in the council. Sorry, opening up my GIS, Google Docs, whatever, trying to find Kitty's cottage on the West Mountain. So it's that knowledge, that local knowledge, that trust that builds, which takes a long, long time, you know. Yeah, and the cups of tea and the sambos. And now there you go, there's the walks signed. There's four different coloured walks. So another project that I suppose is iconic for me, along with being known as the girl who had the hairy plant out on the golf course, this was something that followed me around for quite a while. So up in Howth again, you've got all these amazing habitats, and one of them being heathland. And sure, look, there's all sorts of management and biodiversity going into heathland, but I thought, why are the council spending all this money yanking machinery up to Howth? The machines are getting broken, you know, because they kept hitting off rocks. Can we not bring grazing back? So going back to 2010, we launched a trial project up in Howth where we put some goats up there to eat the heather. So we built a little fenced area, a trial area, and we did a floral survey of what was there. And then we put the goats in, saw what they ate, did a floral survey of when they were gone, and said, yeah, look, they do eat the heathland, they do maintain the heather. So it was picked up by the Journal, it was picked up by the BBC and Near FM. And I am quoted to having said, the 3 goats we have, they're a breed called Golden Guernsey, and they're almost like dogs. So if they're happy, their tails will be up in the air. Well, that sentence followed me around the council for so long. Is anyone here wagging their tail? Look, you're happy out. Yeah. But it was a real, hold on, I'll go on to the next slide. So again, the goats up in Howth. So if you look at old maps, which I was poring over, and beautiful old paintings of the Howth landscape, you'll actually see goats. There's a beautiful old painting where you can see goats in front of the castle and you can see Ireland's Eye out in the distance. So historically, goats were there. And speaking to some of the locals, again, they would say, oh yeah, my granny, you know, she was pregnant and she got stuck in the stile up there, up the mountain when she was coming back from milking a goat. So there were historically goats on the mountain, but trying to reintroduce them was such a hilarious journey of conversation between various people. So some of the locals thought it was a great idea. Some of the locals thought they'd be so smelly and they'd make so much noise and they'd escape out of, you know, their enclosure and they'd eat their underwear and they'd do all these awful things. So we really had to push the PR. So we got this really pretty picture of a goat. We called the project, it was the Heathland Management Project, and we called it Goats for Howth. Yeah, trying to separate fact from fiction, bringing in the storytelling element of it to show that there were goats on Howth. So, you know, Kevin's granny got stuck in a stile on her way back from milking a goat, and that was true. That was like a folklore story, but it was true. And then, as Paul was talking about earlier, the local schools. So we invited all the local schools to get involved in naming the goats, and they had to, you know, there was an art competition, and whoever drew the most innovative picture of the goats and had the best name, well, sure, they got to name Maggie May. So, you know, there was a lot of learning and a lot of education opportunities there for the local school kids. We then had volunteer herders, so goat herders. So they had a checklist. They'd go up every day at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and check were the goats there. Because that's the thing as well, Howth, you know, the people up there would often say, sure, we're neither fish nor fowl. They're not rural, they're not in the countryside, they're not in the city, but they have all, you know, you can get from Dublin city centre out to Howth in maybe 20 minutes. And so there would be that element of antisocial behaviour, and there'd be a bit of, you know, especially in the summertime, there'd be a bit of firelighting and a bit of whatever goes on sitting around fires up on a mountain. So, you know, oftentimes I was out there at midnight, 2 a.m. and when the gorse fires came, sure, I was out there constantly for about 3 days. But yeah, we had a Twitter account. So back to the whole idea of communication, and I had to tweet as a goat. So I had to go up there and Twitter, I was relatively new to Twitter at the time. I haven't recovered from that and I haven't used Twitter since. But yeah, I had to tweet as a goat. So here I am, it's a beautiful sunny day. Please feel free to come up and visit me, but also please stop feeding me carrots. I'm supposed to be here to eat the heather. And, you know, all this really funny stuff. But it was a really innovative, really great project, and people got so behind us because they were involved, as you guys were talking about, from a grassroots level. But again, communication, and managing expectations. So trying to get away from the idea of, well, sure, the council will fix it, the council will sort it, to give the ownership of the project back to the local people. Sorry, just want to, yeah, I'm nearly finished. I'm talking way too much. That project moving on 10 years. So it stayed going as a trial for a couple of years, but now we've gotten some more funding and we've set up a more permanent base for them in Howth. And we've kept that communication going with the Old Goat Society down in Mulranny. And there is a job going for a goat herder, if any of you want it, pretty well paid. So have a look there if anyone want to head on up to Howth. And just super quickly, the last project that I'm working on, which I suppose is current, and so can draw on the technologies that are around now, which really weren't around even a year ago, or at least they weren't used by the local authority in the way that they are now in terms of community engagement. So if I just go back to the start, when I started working with the council, the biodiversity was all about getting the data in from the outside, bringing it in and mapping it and using it within the council. So we're using it within the council to create this GIS database, showing what's important. So that there is just a map of the green infrastructure of Fingal County Council. So it shows all the green and important bits, and that then feeds into the local development plan. What we're working on now is the idea of biodiversity action plans for these tidy towns. So whereas before we were looking at biodiversity within the county on areas that we kind of knew were biodiversity rich and biodiversity important, now we're going to all the towns. We've divided the county up into 4 main areas, and there's a number of tidy towns groups within each of the areas. So there's a number of tidy towns groups up here in the North County, across here around Swords, Rush and Lusk, Dublin 15, and around Howth Malahide. There's 20 tidy towns groups in total, and we've engaged 4 separate consultants. We've engaged a consultant to work up here, 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 and here. The idea being that at the end of the process, we'll have not only the biodiversity that we know is there, but the local biodiversity. So really grassroots coming up. So what's important in people's gardens, and can we link a whole load of front gardens or a whole load of back gardens? Can we link what's outside your front door or what's on your road? Things that have come up for me are some people who are in the tidy towns groups, they have no email, or they might never check their email, or they might have mobile, or their mobile might only have service when they're in their house. And again, this idea of people aren't chatting over tea, meeting each other on walks, everything has to be organised and scheduled. And I think that while it's great in some ways, you really miss out on the real energy, I suppose, of a project. I couldn't let it go without putting up these icons. I think after COVID is over, I don't ever want to do a Microsoft Teams meeting, a Zoom meeting, or a webinar for a good little bit of time. I want to go out and I want to meet people and be back up in those houses in Howth, having a real cup of tea. I suppose, just in summary, a good friend and colleague and I argue over this constantly when we talk about communication and information. He often says to me, Deb, it doesn't matter how many people know that it's bad to do something. If they keep on doing it, it doesn't matter how many people know it's bad to remove dandelions. If people just keep removing them with the knowledge that they're removing them, that it's bad, sure, what harm? But I think that communication is key to any successful community project. Our ways of communicating are changing. And again, like this all depends on age profile, location, work, family. But as long as we continue to do it with respect and dignity on all sides, we're in the right connection. My last point, which I think is really important, when a project ends, when the project management of something is finished, it's often left with, well, who do I go to now with all, if I have any new ideas, or how do we keep it going? So to keep the project living. And I know I've gone way over time, Sol. I just got quite excited talking about all them things. So thank you very, very much for listening to me. There's my email. Sorry I didn't share it correctly at the start. And I think that's me.